Abu Islam was a Pakistani man living in Saudi Arabia for 10 years and working as a medical doctor in a hospital in Jeddah city. He was a widower who lost his wife many years ago. He had only one son from his late wife. His son also died in a car accident along with his mother. His late son was called Islam, and that is where the doctor obtained his precious nickname, Abu Islam. His real name was Muhammad Ali, but everybody knew him as Abu Islam, i.e. father of Islam. For many years, after the death of his wife and son, Abu Islam remained single. Recently, however, his parents made him marry his cousin, Sakina Ahmed. It wasn't a love marriage but an arranged marriage. There was a 20-year age difference between Sakina and her cousin, Abu Islam. Sakina was a university graduate. She was in love with a young man that was her neighbor. They were in a serious relationship and wanted to get married. For some reason, her parents objected and married her off to her cousin, Abu Islam, in order to put an end to this shameful love affair. Abu Islam of course never knew anything about the love affair between the neighbor and his new bride. He spent only 1 week in Pakistan with his new bride. As soon as he returned to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Abu Islam began the process of bringing his new bride to live with him. After her arrival in Jeddah city, Sakina resumed her affair with her long-distance lover, secretly communicating with him by phone and sometimes writing letters to him. She told her lover not to write back or telephone her. She would phone him whenever there was an opportunity for her to do so. Since her husband was always busy at work, Sakina found ample time and space to communicate with her true love and dream of what could be. Nevertheless, the separated lovers weren't satisfied communicating just through writings and talking on the phone. They felt the need to be near each other and express their love for each through other means. In order to work toward this goal, the lovers made a secret plan. Accordingly, this plan called for Sakina's lover to apply for a job in Saudi Arabia and then come and live near his beloved. The lover followed the plan and applied for a work visa to Saudi Arabia. As soon as he obtained the visa, he traveled from Karachi city to Jeddah city. Yasin Sheikh, Sakina's lover, refused to accept the fact that love affairs had no place in Muslim society, and he was determined to pursue his beloved wherever she went. He had studied engineering at Karachi University, and after his graduation, he became a very successful engineer. When he arrived in Jeddah, he stayed briefly with his Pakistani friend. Shortly afterward, he moved from his friend's apartment and rented an apartment in a building occupied mostly by Pakistani tenants. Yasin did not move to this apartment complex because he loved his people but because his beloved was living there with her husband. As it turns out, everything worked out perfectly for the lovers and they were able to live and be close to each other. Not only that, whenever Sakina's husband went to work, she called her lover on the phone and asked him to come over to her apartment. Meeting for the first time after a long and painful separation, the lovers did not deny their passions and expressions of love and all the feelings they had for each other. Whenever they met, they kissed, hugged, and had sexual intercourse. Before Sakina was married to her cousin, the lovers had never had sex. In those days, they believed sex before marriage is haram and a disgrace. They were hoping sooner or later they would get married to each other with the blessings of their families. What Sakina and Yasin were doing would not remain hidden forever in a closed and strict Muslim society like Saudi Arabia. Their Pakistani neighbors had eyes to see and ears to hear. Many times, some curious Pakistani neighbors spotted Yasin entering the apartment of Dr. Abu Islam in his absence. According to the Islamic Sharia law, the Muslim wife was not supposed to allow any man to enter her house in her husband's absence even if that man happened to be her father-in-law or brother-in-law. She could only allow her own father or brother to enter her house if her husband wasn't there. Some of the neighbors, being moved by what they saw as an unholy alliance, made it their business to contact Dr. Abu Islam by phone and disclosed to him what was happening behind his back. Some of them even wrote anonymous letters and sent them to Dr. Abu Islam to his address at the hospital. Although Dr. Abu Islam by then had lived with his wife for over a year, he never suspected that she was having an affair with another man or that she would do something like that behind his back. Therefore, the news of his wife cheating on him made him feel the ultimate betrayal, especially when he had succumbed to his parents' wishes and had married her. He wanted to punish her for her unfaithfulness but decided to verify the rumors first. If she really was dishonoring him in this fashion and defiling their marriage bed, he would catch her and her secret lover red-handed, and thus he would have the right to divorce her, sending her back to Pakistan. Dr. Abu Islam never thought of killing his wife or sending her to the Sharia court to be stoned to death for cheating on him. He did not want a guilty conscience of having caused the death of his own wife or exposing their families unnecessarily to bad publicity and a bad reputation. After all, she was his close relative. However, before Dr. Abu Islam could carry out his plan to punish his unfaithful wife, his self-righteous neighbors took it upon themselves and did what they thought was their duty as good Muslims to do. They thought that perhaps Dr. Abu Islam either did not believe the information he received through the various means of communication, or either he believed the news and was too busy to do anything about it. Accordingly, the news of the Pakistani wife who was cheating on her husband by sleeping with her boyfriend reached Saudi police headquarters. The Jeddah police carefully planned a surprise raid, being given the exact day and hour of the criminal indiscretion. Upon arriving at the apartment of Dr. Abu Islam, they broke down the door and rushed inside. Unfortunately, when the cops entered the apartment, the lovers happened to be in bed making love to each other. They were arrested bare naked and taken into custody. After their arrest and harsh interrogation, both lovers admitted their secret affair and adulterous relationship. During her interrogation, Sakina was not only beaten up by the male police officers, but she was also gang-raped by them. A few days later, the lovers were tried and convicted by the Jeddah Sharia court. Yasin was sentenced to receive 100 lashes because he committed adultery while he wasn't married. Sakina was sentenced to be stoned to death because she committed adultery with another man while she was married and having a husband. Yasin received his 100 lashes with a whip and went back to work the following day. The flogging he received to his back was less painful than a massage. The person who flogged Yasin held a copy of the Quran in his right underarm between his right shoulder and his chest, and he was not supposed to drop the holy book while he was carrying out the flogging. Nevertheless, the case of Sakina's punishment was different and carried out by over 100 men. Around 12:45 p.m. on the following Friday afternoon, the public ground was crowded by men dressed in white cloths, and all of them had long beards. Shortly after the gathering of the faithful, the condemned Pakistani girl was brought to the area in a well-guarded police escort. She was handcuffed and her legs chained together. She was dressed up in a black niqab that covered her entire body. When they dragged her out of the truck, she was resisting and screaming for help. She was begging the police to spare her life. None of them seemed to heed her pleas and cries for help. A couple of police officers dragged her like an animal until they brought her to the middle of the grounds. There was already a hole dug for her burial. The police forcibly dumped her body inside the hole, kicking and screaming, and she twisted her ankle upon impact. Then, some men came and buried her up to her neck. Only her neck and head were visible while the rest of her body was completely buried in the ground. After that, her face was uncovered so that everyone could see her. She was expected to see her executioners. It was 48 degrees Celsius plus when poor Sakina was buried up to her neck in hot sand. The heat of the sun and the hot sand scorched her body, causing second-degree burns to her flesh, and she was screaming louder and louder. Underneath the black niqab, she was sweating and burning like steam boiling inside a tea kettle. It would have been more tolerable to put her in a furnace than to bury her in hot sand. They did not have to stone her to death, for being left just 1 hour in the hot dry ground, she would have been cooked alive instead. When her face was uncovered, her face was shining with the reflection of the blazing sun. Sakina was a very beautiful Pakistani girl. She had a very fair complexion, as if she was the daughter of a white woman and a Pakistani man. She had very long black hair. Through her beautiful face, one could see a very frightened young woman. She continued to scream and call for help. She even called the names of her Allah and Prophet and begged them to rescue her from this cruel and painful death. Neither Allah came out of his house to rescue her from the holy city of Mecca, nor was her Prophet resurrected from his grave in Medina to come and save her. Instead, an old man came forward, shouted Allah Akbar, and cast the first 3 stones at her head. He came so close to Sakina. She had no way of dodging him or moving her head out of the way. 1 stone missed her and the other 2 hit her on the side of her face and the upper part of her forehead. Her face and head began to bleed. Sakina felt a terrible pain shoot right through her head like electric shock waves inside her brain. She began to scream louder and plead even more for them to have mercy upon her. Then, the old man retreated to his place in the line of men who formed a half circle around the victim. As soon as the old man reached his place at the opposite end of the line, the other men began to cast their stones at Sakina. The stones hit her from all different directions and blood gushed out from her face and head like a waterfall. Sakina's head jerked each time she was hit and she tried desperately to move her head in different directions to avoid the stones. Her screaming could no longer be heard due to the men shouting in unison, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. Sakina felt as if a construction worker was pounding her face with plywood and driving a hammer and nails into her skull. Blood was running out of her nose and she was trying desperately to breathe through her mouth. When she opened her mouth to breathe, the stones pierced her lips and inside her mouth, nearly breaking all her teeth. Her teeth fell out of her mouth and her long hair became meated with blood, her skull was smashed by the crushing rocks and her brains oozed out of her head. Her head stopped moving and fell backward, a sign her neck had been broken by the heavy stones. Although her head became lifeless, the cruel men continued to throw stones at the victim until she was covered in a heap of stones. After Sakina's head was fully covered with stones, the police authority announced over the loudspeakers to cease all stoning. Then, a group of cops came with a shovel and removed the stones from off the victim. When all the stones were removed, Sakina's face was brutally marred and completely disfigured. Blood still ran from her body. Her body was dug out of the ground and dragged like a dead animal and hauled away as trash.